I'm Heather Adams, 32, and I never imagined I'd be sitting across from my cousin Jessica's fiancé Matthew during his job interview. The confident smirk he wore as he strutted into my office disappeared the moment I introduced myself. 6 months earlier, at my family's summer gathering, Head laughed in my face about my tech startup, saying a real company like his would never even interview someone like me. The same smirk that once belittled my career aspirations now melted into horror as I slid his resume back across the table. "Interview's over," I said. "Before I dive into this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button if you've ever had someone underestimate you. Subscribe to join our community of strong women who refuse to be pushed around. Now, let's get into how this all started. I'm Heather Adams, 32, and I never imagined I'd be sitting across from my cousin Jessica's fiancé Matthew during his job interview. The confident smirk he wore as he strutted into my office disappeared the moment I introduced myself. 6 months earlier, at my family's summer gathering, Head laughed in my face about my tech startup, saying a real company like his would never even interview someone like me. The same smirk that once belittled my career aspirations now melted into horror as I slid his resume back across the table. "Interviews over," I said. "Before I dive into this wild story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button if you've ever had someone underestimate you. Subscribe to join our community of strong women who refuse to be pushed around. Now, let's get into how this all started. Jessica and I had been close as children, sharing secrets, planning our futures, and promising to be in each other's weddings someday. But as we grew older, a competitive edge crept into our relationship. She stayed in Ridgeview, became a local real estate agent, and embedded herself as the golden child of the family, while I was the distant relative who missed most holidays. Aunt Patricia had outdone herself with decorations. The backyard was transformed with twinkling lights, floral arrangements, and a banner announcing "Congratulations, Jessica and Matthew." Family members I hadn't seen in years filled the space, many giving me the familiar look who finally decided to visit greeting that made my stomach tighten. Jessica squealed when she saw me, rushing over in her designer dress. "Heather, you actually came." Her hug felt genuine, but her words carried their usual backhanded edge. Then she introduced me to Matthew. Tall, conventionally handsome, with an expensive watch and perfect hair, he looked exactly like the finance executive Shed described in her texts. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "So you're the California cousin," he said, looking me up and down. "Jessica's told me all about your little tech project." Little tech project. I forced a smile and congratulated them both. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily enough until Uncle Robert, Jessica's father and always her biggest cheerleader, asked about my work. Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in. "Remember how Heather used to talk about creating some big tech company when we were kids? She was always saying she'd build the next Facebook." She laughed, looking around the table. "She used to write business plans in her diary instead of boys' names." My cheeks burned. Those private dreams had been shared with Jessica during late-night sleepovers, not meant for family amusement. Matthew leaned forward, swirling his expensive scotch. "So what exactly is this company of yours? What's your user base? Revenue model?" I began explaining our data security platform and recent growth metrics, but I could see his eyes glaze over. He interrupted me mid-sentence. "Sounds like a hobby business," he said dismissively. "The real tech industry is brutally competitive. I evaluate tech acquisitions at Lancaster Financial, and believe me, we wouldn't look twice at startups without serious backing." Jessica beamed at him adoringly, while Uncle Robert nodded in agreement. Matthew continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "A company like mine would never even interview someone like you without an MBA from a top-5 school and connections in the industry. That's just reality." The table fell uncomfortably silent. My father cleared his throat, attempting to change the subject, but the damage was done. Matthew had effectively dismissed 5 years of my hard work in front of my entire family, and Jessica had handed him the ammunition. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag. As I was leaving, Aunt Patricia patted my arm and said, "Maybe it's time to come home and try something more practical, dear." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was my grandmother Rose, the family matriarch, and the one person who had always believed in me. "Don't let them get to you, Heather," she said firmly. "That young man has more polish than substance. I've seen your determination since you were little. Prove them wrong not with words, but with actions." Her confidence in me was like a balm, reminding me why I started this journey in the first place. Before hanging up, she added, "Success is the best revenge, but family is still family. Remember that balance." I fell asleep, planning my return to San Francisco, more determined than ever to make my company not just successful, but undeniable. Back in San Francisco, my conversation with Matthew fueled a fire I hadn't felt since founding the company. I threw myself into work with renewed purpose, his dismissive words echoing in my head during late nights at the office. Few people knew about my difficult journey to get here. I'd dropped out of Penn State during my junior year when my startup idea began gaining traction, a decision that horrified my extended family, but which my parents reluctantly supported. For 2 years, I'd worked 3 jobs: barista in the morning, retail in the afternoon, and rideshare driving at night, all while teaching myself coding and building my product. The first version of SecureShare, my data security platform, was created in a tiny studio apartment where I slept on a futon and used plastic bins as furniture. I'd pitched to 37 investors before landing my first seed funding, and even then, it was barely enough to hire 2 part-time developers. But now, 3 years after that initial investment, things were accelerating. Our latest round of funding had brought in $12 million. Our client list included mid-sized healthcare companies and financial institutions who valued our unique approach to data protection. The team had grown to 48 employees, and we'd just moved into proper offices in downtown San Francisco. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. GlobeNet, a respected but struggling competitor with valuable patents and an established client base, was looking for acquisition offers. Their technology complemented ours perfectly, but they were hesitant to sell to a younger company. They're worried about being absorbed by an unproven leader, explained Kira Sinclair, my chief of staff and most trusted advisor. With her background in corporate strategy and unfailingly direct approach, she'd become indispensable to me both professionally and personally. "Then we need to prove we're the right home for them," I replied. "Set up meetings with their executive team. I want to address their concerns personally." Over the next 2 months, I practically lived in GlobeNet's headquarters, learning their operations, meeting their employees, and outlining a vision for how our companies could be stronger together. When the acquisition finally went through, the board of the merged companies unanimously appointed me as CEO, a position I never expected to achieve before 40. One evening, as Kira and I celebrated with takeout Chinese food in my office, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Hey stranger, wedding planning in full swing. Need to know if you're bringing a +1. Also, you're doing bridesmaid dress shopping with us next month, no excuses." I hesitated before replying. Part of me wanted to decline, but despite everything, she was still family. I confirmed I'd be there, solo. "Speaking of family drama," Kira said, scrolling through her tablet, "you might find this interesting." She turned the screen toward me, showing an industry newsletter. Lancaster Financial, Matthew's prestigious firm, had lost several major clients and was reportedly downsizing their tech division. "Didn't you say your cousin's fiancé works there?" In tech acquisitions, my curiosity piqued. I did something I'd never normally do. I searched for Matthew Jenkins on our applicant tracking system. Sure enough, his resume had been submitted 3 days earlier for a senior position in our business development department. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Matthew had applied to my company, my hobby business, without realizing I was now the CEO after the merger. GlobeNet's acquisition had been covered in industry press, but apparently not widely enough for Matthew to connect the dots. Should I recuse myself from the hiring process? I asked Kira, though I already knew what I wanted to do. She considered this for a moment. Legally, you don't have to. He submitted his application through normal channels, and you'd be evaluating him on his professional merits. A slight smile crossed her face. Besides, wouldn't you like to see his reaction when he realizes whose company he's applied to? I felt a twinge of guilt at the satisfaction that thought brought me. But then I remembered his smug face as he belittled my career, and Jessica's betrayal of my childhood confidences. Schedule him for an interview when I'm back from the wedding preparations, I decided. And let's keep my position quiet during the initial screening process. 2 weeks later, I was back in Ridgeview for Jessica's wedding preparations. The bridal shower was scheduled for the weekend, followed by dress fittings and venue visits. I checked into the town's only boutique hotel rather than staying with family, a decision that raised eyebrows but preserved my sanity. The first evening, Aunt Patricia hosted a family dinner at her home. I arrived intentionally 15 minutes late, hoping to minimize pre-dinner small talk. Jessica greeted me with air kisses and immediately began detailing wedding plans while I nodded and smiled appropriately. "You look different," she said, studying me. "Did you get work done?" I laughed. "Just the benefits of sleeping more than 4 hours a night." The truth was, success had changed me in subtle ways. My wardrobe had upgraded from fast fashion to tailored pieces. The constant stress-induced acne had cleared. I carried myself with the confidence that comes from leading a team through challenges and victories. At dinner, I noticed Uncle Robert watching me with unusual interest. A real estate developer who'd made his fortune in commercial properties had always treated me with benign indifference. Tonight, he seemed almost calculating. "So, Heather," he began as we were served the main course, "Jessica tells me your company's doing well. You acquired someone recently." I nodded, keeping my answer deliberately vague. "We merged with another security firm. It's been a positive transition. And you're what now? Vice president of something." His tone suggested it was a generous assumption. Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in. "Heather's being modest. From what I read online, she's actually running the whole thing now." Her voice carried forced enthusiasm. "That's why I've been picking her brain about the tech industry. I'm so concerned about Matthew with all these layoffs happening. I nearly choked on my water." Jessica had never picked my brain about anything related to my work. We'd barely communicated except for wedding logistics. "Is everything okay at Lancaster Financial?" I asked innocently, watching her reaction. Jessica's smile tightened. "Oh, it's just the usual shuffling. Matthew's actually exploring some exciting new opportunities. More responsibilities, better compensation package." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between us, he's interviewing at some major firms." I nodded sympathetically, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with her sudden interest in my industry. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I was returning down the hallway, I heard voices from Uncle Robert study Jessica and Matthew in what sounded like a heated discussion. I paused, knowing I shouldn't eavesdrop, but unable to walk away. "Did you get anything useful from her?" Matthew asked. "Not yet," Jessica replied, sounding frustrated. "She's being weirdly secretive about her company, but I'll keep working on her. The wedding stuff should soften her up. We don't have much time. My interview's in 2 weeks, and I need every edge I can get. This merger she's involved with is exactly the kind of experience they'll want to hear about." "Just play nice with her for a few weeks," Jessica said. "Once you're hired, who cares? You'll outrank her soon enough anyway." Matthew's laugh was cold. "At least the family connection got me a foot in. These tech companies always talk about merit, but it's really about who you know." I felt sick, rooted to the spot as their words sank in. Jessica wasn't interested in reconnecting. She and Matthew were using me to help prepare for his interview at my company. Dad's friend on their board said they're desperate for business development, people who understand acquisitions. Jessica continued. "Dad's getting you that information about their last merger. Uncle Robert was involved too?" The betrayal cut deep. Not only were they using me, but they were actively trying to access confidential business information through family connections. I quietly retreated, then made a show of returning loudly down the hallway. The study door quickly closed. For the rest of the evening, I maintained a pleasant facade while my mind raced. My instinct was to confront them immediately, or withdraw from the wedding completely. But something in me, perhaps my grandmother's influence, counseled patience and strategy over impulse. Back at the hotel, I called Kira. "They're playing me," I said flatly after explaining what I'd overheard. "And apparently Uncle Robert has some contact on our board feeding them information." Kira was silent for a moment. "Thomas Blackwood," she finally said. "He and your uncle serve on some charitable foundation together. I've noticed him asking unusual questions about our integration processes lately." We spent the next 2 hours developing a plan for Matthew's interview, one that would reveal his knowledge gaps while protecting the company's information. By the time we hung up, I felt more centered. I didn't sleep much that night, vacillating between hurt at the family betrayal and determination not to let it affect my professional judgment. One thing was certain: Matthew's interview would proceed, but not in the way he was expecting. 2 weeks later, I sat in our San Francisco headquarters main conference room, watching the elevator numbers climb on the digital display above the doors. According to reception, Matthew Jenkins had arrived precisely 12 minutes early for his interview, eager but not desperately so. Our office occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The space had been designed to impress, with its open concept, state-of-the-art technology, and subtle displays of our industry awards. Today, it would serve as the perfect backdrop for a long-overdue reality check. Kira had briefed the interview panel, all senior leaders who reported directly to me about the situation. They understood this was both a legitimate assessment of a candidate and a personal matter for me. Each had prepared targeted questions for Matthew about acquisition strategy, focusing particularly on areas where Uncle Robert's leaked information might be evident. When Matthew stepped off the elevator, I observed him through the glass wall. He looked confident in his perfectly tailored suit, Rolex watch, and leather portfolio, the uniform of East Coast finance. He couldn't see me yet. I'd positioned myself at the far end of the conference table with my back to the door. "Mr. Jenkins," our HR director greeted him warmly. "Thank you for coming in today. Your preliminary interviews were quite impressive." Matthew's smile was practiced and polished. "I appreciate the opportunity. I've been researching your company extensively." The GlobeNet acquisition was particularly interesting, a bold move. I tensed slightly at the mention of the acquisition. How much had he learned through Uncle Robert's connection? As he was led into the conference room, I remained facing the window, letting the rest of the panel begin the introductions. Only when everyone else had spoken did I slowly turn my chair around. For a moment, Matthew didn't register who I was. 5 years in tech had changed my appearance. Gone were the casual clothes and nervous energy of my family visits. In their place was a CEO in a custom-tailored suit, with the composed confidence that came from leading a successful company. When recognition dawned, the color drained from his face. "Heather," his voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Jenkins," I replied evenly. "I believe we've met before. I'm Heather Adams, CEO of SecureShare Technologies." The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew's eyes darted from me to the other interviewers, his mind visibly racing to recalibrate. "I didn't realize you were involved with this company," he finally managed. "Involved?" I smiled slightly. "I founded it. But please, don't let my presence distract you. We're all eager to hear about your qualifications." To his credit, Matthew attempted to regain his composure, launching into a well-rehearsed summary of his experience. But as the technical questions began, his knowledge gaps became increasingly apparent. He used industry jargon correctly but lacked substantive understanding of security protocols and integration challenges, precisely the expertise needed for the position. I waited until the standard questions had been exhausted before leaning forward. "Mr. Jenkins, you mentioned our GlobeNet acquisition earlier. Could you elaborate on what you find interesting about it?" His answer closely mirrored internal language from our confidential board presentations documents that Thomas Blackwood had access to. Matthew spoke with unearned familiarity about our integration strategy, using specifics that hadn't been published in any press release. When he finished, I nodded thoughtfully. That's a remarkably detailed analysis for someone outside the company. I'm curious, how did you come by this information? Matthew shifted uncomfortably. Industry publications, investor calls. I make it a point to thoroughly research potential employers. Impressive, I said, considering some of those details haven't been shared publicly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He knew he'd been caught. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. Look, Heather, Miss Adams, I understand this might be awkward given our personal connection. But I hope we can maintain professionalism. Jessica has always spoken highly of your business acumen. The audacity was breathtaking. I glanced at the other interviewers, who looked equally stunned by his pivot. Personal connection, I repeated. You mean the family gathering where you informed me that a real company like yours would never even interview someone like me? Or perhaps you're referring to your efforts with my cousin to extract confidential business information to prepare for this interview. His face reddened. That's taken out of context. Jessica was just trying to help facilitate a professional connection between us, a connection you plan to use to get a foot in, then outrank me soon enough anyway. I believe were your words. I slid his resume back across the table. Mr. Jenkins, this interview is over. You can't do that, he protested, his polished veneer cracking. This is blatant personal bias. I have relationships with board members who will receive a full report of this interview, including your demonstrated knowledge of confidential company information. I interrupted calmly. If you'd like to explain to them how you obtained that information, I'm sure they'd be interested. Our security team certainly is. I stood and buttoned my jacket. Security will escort you to the elevator. I suggest you use the ride down to reflect on the difference between networking and corporate espionage. As he was led away, still protesting, I remained in the conference room, hands flat on the table to hide their slight trembling. The confrontation had been necessary but draining. Well, said our CTO, after a moment of silence. That was the most interesting interview I've conducted in 15 years. A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. I thanked the team for their professionalism and dismissed them, remaining alone in the conference room to compose myself before the inevitable family fallout began. My phone rang precisely 43 minutes after Matthew left our building. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail. But postponing the inevitable wouldn't make it easier. How dare you? She screamed the moment I answered. You humiliated Matthew in front of everyone. He was perfect for that job, and you ruined it because of some petty jealousy. I moved to my private office and closed the door. Jessica. He wasn't qualified for the position, and he attempted to use stolen confidential information during his interview. That's a lie. He worked hard researching your precious company. You're just threatened because he's more qualified than you ever were. Her version of reality was so distorted that arguing seemed pointless. I heard you both at Uncle Robert's house, Jessica. I know you were using the wedding to extract information from me. There was a brief silence before she switched tactics. We're family, Heather. Families are supposed to help each other. All I did was try to help my future husband get a fair shot at a good job. You've become so cold and corporate that you've forgotten what matters. The guilt trip might have worked years ago, but not today. If you wanted my professional help, you could have asked directly, instead of sneaking around and trying to steal proprietary information. God, listen to yourself! Proprietary information, she mimicked. You used to be real before you moved to California and became this robot. My family group chat exploded minutes after I hung up. Aunt Patricia was deeply disappointed in my unprofessional behavior. Uncle Robert demanded I make this right immediately. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had strong opinions about business ethics and family loyalty. Only my parents and grandmother remained silent. By evening, Uncle Robert had called an emergency family meeting at his house without inviting me, though I was informed I was the main topic. My mother called afterward, her voice tired. It wasn't good, honey. Robert's furious. He says you've embarrassed the family and potentially damaged Matthew's career. Did you tell them what Matthew and Jessica did? I asked. I tried, but, she sighed. Patricia had a different version of events. What do you mean? Mom hesitated. She said she gave Matthew your business calendar and some notes about company priorities to help him prepare as a favor to Jessica. She didn't think there was anything wrong with family helping family. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Aunt Patricia had actively participated in accessing my confidential information? The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. There's more, Mom continued reluctantly. Your grandmother stood up for you, said they should hear your side before judging. Robert told her to stay out of business matters she doesn't understand. The thought of Uncle Robert dismissing Grandma Rose, the wisest person in our family, made my blood boil. What did Grandma say to that? Mom's voice brightened slightly. She told him that integrity isn't a business matter. It's a character matter. And she understood that perfectly well. Despite everything, that made me smile. The next morning, I received a formal email from Uncle Robert, copying the entire extended family. He outlined my unprofessional conduct, obvious bias, and betrayal of family trust. The email concluded with an ultimatum from Jessica: apologize publicly to Matthew, offer him the position he interviewed for, or be uninvited from the wedding. I closed my laptop without responding and booked the next flight back to San Francisco. As I packed, my phone buzzed with a text from Grandma Rose. Standing for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always right. Love you, sweetheart. Hours later, as my plane reached cruising altitude, I looked out at the clouds and felt strangely untethered. I'd always defined myself partly through my family connections, even when they were strained. Now, those connections were fraying beyond repair, and yet I felt more certain of my own identity than ever before. The clarity was interrupted by an email notification from our PR team. Urgent. Financial Times inquiry re. Nepotism allegations. Someone was leaking the story to the press. I landed in San Francisco to find our company in crisis mode. What had begun as a personal conflict had mushroomed into a potential PR disaster. Overnight, 3 different financial publications had reached out with questions about alleged nepotism and family conflicts affecting leadership decisions. Kira met me at the airport, tablet in hand, already briefing me as we walked to the car. The story's being pushed hard by someone with media connections, she explained. The angle isn't just about Matthew's interview, they're questioning the entire GlobeNet acquisition, suggesting family conflicts might have influenced corporate decisions. That's absurd, I said, scrolling through the press inquiries. The board unanimously approved the acquisition. Every step was documented and transparent, which is why this feels coordinated, Kira replied, her expression grave. Someone's deliberately trying to undermine confidence in your leadership. Back at the office, my executive team had gathered for an emergency meeting. Our CFO looked particularly concerned. 3 institutional investors called this morning requesting clarification about our governance procedures, he reported. And there's been unusual trading activity in our stock. It's down 7% since the market opened. Our general counsel added, we need to get ahead of this narrative before the board meeting tomorrow. Thomas Blackwood has already called an executive session to discuss leadership concerns. Thomas Blackwood, the board member connected to Uncle Robert. The pieces were starting to fit together. We drafted a statement addressing the situation factually, while respecting confidentiality. Yes, a candidate with a family connection had interviewed. No, they weren't hired. Yes, all proper protocols were followed. It was professional but felt inadequate against what was clearly a coordinated attack. The board meeting the next day was tense from the start. Thomas Blackwood, a silver-haired venture capitalist with old-school connections, began by expressing grave concerns about leadership judgment and questioning whether I was allowing personal matters to influence business decisions. Several other board members looked uncomfortable but didn't immediately object. I realized with a sinking feeling that Thomas had been laying groundwork before the meeting. I move that we establish a special committee to review recent executive decisions. Thomas continued smoothly, including the GlobeNet integration and recent hiring practices. On what grounds? I challenged, maintaining my composure despite the anger building inside me. Prudence, he replied with a thin smile. When questions arise about leadership, it's the board's fiduciary responsibility to investigate. The discussion grew heated. While I had supporters on the board, Thomas had clearly influenced several members. Just as it seemed they might approve his proposal, our CISO burst into the meeting, apologizing for the interruption. "We've detected a significant data breach," he announced, handing me a tablet. "Someone's been accessing confidential merger documents using board-level credentials." All eyes turned to the tablet showing the log records. The accessing account belonged to Thomas Blackwood. Thomas immediately went on the offensive. "This is preposterous. A transparent attempt to deflect from the real issues. I've barely accessed the board portal in weeks. The logs indicate otherwise," our CISO replied calmly. "Your credentials have accessed sensitive documents 57 times in the past month, including detailed integration plans and financial projections that aren't typically reviewed by board members." The meeting descended into chaos. Thomas demanded a separate investigation into what he called a fabricated security issue, while other board members began questioning his earlier motives. In the midst of the confusion, Kira quietly entered and handed me a note. "Urgent call from legal. Matthew Jenkins has retained counsel and is threatening a discrimination lawsuit." Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my heart sink. "Confidential. Proposed takeover bid for SecureShare Technologies." Later that evening, after hours of emergency meetings with legal counsel, security teams, and key board members, the full picture emerged. Thomas had been working with Matthew and a group of investors from Lancaster Financial to orchestrate a hostile takeover of my company. They had been planning to use the family conflict narrative to undermine confidence in my leadership, drive down our stock price, and then swoop in with a lowball acquisition offer. The stock had indeed plummeted nearly 15% by market close. Board members were receiving panicked calls from investors. Our largest client had paused contract renewal discussions pending resolution of leadership questions. I sat alone in my office after everyone left, watching the city lights below and feeling the weight of near defeat. 5 years of building something meaningful, of proving myself against all odds, and it could all collapse because of family betrayal and corporate greed. A knock at my door startled me. It was our head of HR, Nancy Williams, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said, "but Matthew Jenkins has been calling employees, trying to get dirt on you and the company culture. He approached the wrong person. My assistant used to work at Lancaster Financial and recognized his tactics. She recorded the call. She placed a USB drive on my desk. You didn't get this from me. But whatever's happening here goes beyond normal corporate politics." After she left, I listened to the recording with growing disbelief. Matthew was explicitly offering cash for damaging information about me or the company, mentioning Thomas Blackwood as his inside man multiple times. I was still processing this when Kira called. Her voice was tight with excitement. "I've been digging into Matthew's background. His resume is partially falsified. The acquisition deal he claimed to lead at Lancaster? He was just part of the team. The Harvard MBA? He attended a 6-week executive program, not the full degree. For the first time all day, I felt a glimmer of hope. We weren't powerless after all. By morning, I'd barely slept but had formed a clear plan. This wasn't just about defending against attacks anymore. It was about taking back control of the narrative and the company I'd built. I assembled a war room of my most trusted team members: Kira, our General Counsel Maya Rodriguez, CTO Brian Foster, CISO James Washington, and our recently hired Communications Director Diana Chen. "We're facing a coordinated attempt to undermine this company," I began, "involving board member Thomas Blackwood, my cousin's fiancé Matthew Jenkins, and potentially others at Lancaster Financial." They've created a false narrative about leadership instability to drive down our stock price for a hostile takeover. I outlined what we knew so far. Thomas had been accessing confidential documents and feeding information to Matthew. Matthew had falsified credentials and was now actively soliciting damaging information about the company. And someone likely Thomas was pushing a negative story to financial press. Our response needs to be comprehensive, strategic, and by the book. I continued. We have 3 immediate priorities: protect the company, preserve shareholder value, and hold the responsible parties accountable. We divided into teams. Legal began preparing documentation for potential litigation and board action against Thomas. Security focused on further evidence collection and protecting our systems from additional breaches. Communications developed a strategy for addressing investor concerns and media inquiries. Around noon, we received unexpected reinforcements. My grandmother Rose arrived at reception, asking to see me. I brought her to my office, confused but grateful for her presence. I took the first flight out this morning, she explained, placing a weathered leather portfolio on my desk. These might help. Inside were decades-old family documents, Uncle Robert's business records, correspondence, and financial statements, including evidence of several ethically questionable dealings with Thomas Blackwood dating back 20 years. Robert always underestimated me, Grandma Rose said with a slight smile. He never thought I paid attention to business matters, but I've kept records of everything concerning this family since before you were born. The documents revealed a pattern of mutual favors between Uncle Robert and Thomas, including what appeared to be insider trading information and improper business arrangements. More importantly, they provided context for the current situation. Thomas had rescued one of Uncle Robert's failing developments years ago, and Robert had been indebted to him ever since. "How did you know to bring these now?" I asked, amazed by her foresight. "When they excluded me from that family meeting, I knew something wasn't right," she replied simply. "So I went digging. Family problems usually have long roots." With this new information, we refined our strategy. By late afternoon, our legal team had prepared a comprehensive report documenting Thomas' breach of fiduciary duty, complete with server logs, witness statements, and background on his connection to Uncle Robert. Simultaneously, our security team implemented enhanced protocols to protect sensitive information and began recovering potentially compromised documents. We also discovered that Matthew had attempted to access our building after hours using a temporary visitor badge from his interview day, another piece of evidence for our case. Communications prepared a measured press statement, acknowledging governance concerns raised by a board member, but emphasizing our commitment to transparency and proper investigation procedures. We also reached out individually to key investors to provide appropriate reassurance. The decisive moment came that evening during an emergency board meeting. With careful preparation and overwhelming evidence, we presented our findings about Thomas' actions. The other board members were stunned by the scope and documentation of his breach of trust. "These are serious allegations," said our board chair, Gerald Winston. "Mr. Blackwood, do you wish to respond?" Thomas attempted to dismiss the evidence as circumstantial and misinterpreted, but his usual confidence had evaporated. When confronted with the server logs showing his credentials accessing specific documents that later appeared in Matthew's interview responses, he fell silent. "I believe we need to take immediate action," Gerald stated firmly. "I move for the temporary suspension of Mr. Blackwood from this board pending a full investigation, and for a vote of confidence in our CEO's leadership." The motion passed overwhelmingly. Thomas was escorted from the building, his access immediately revoked. The board then unanimously issued a statement of support for my leadership and approved a share buyback program to stabilize our stock price. As a final step, our legal team sent formal letters to Matthew and Lancaster Financial documenting evidence of their involvement in corporate espionage and attempted market manipulation. We didn't threaten litigation explicitly, we didn't have to. The documentation spoke for itself. By midnight, the immediate crisis had been contained. Our stock would likely recover once markets processed. The board's vote of confidence. Thomas had been neutralized as a threat, at least temporarily. And Matthew's attempted lawsuit had a much weaker position now that his own unethical actions had been documented. Exhausted but relieved, I sent most of the team home, thanking them for their extraordinary efforts. Only Kira remained, helping me organize for the next day. "You know this isn't over," she said quietly. "The family situation, I mean?" I nodded, feeling the weight of that reality. The corporate battle had clear rules and procedures. Family conflicts were messier, with deeper emotional stakes. "Jessica's wedding is this weekend," I replied. "I've been officially uninvited, but you're thinking of going anyway." Kira finished for me. "Not to cause a scene," I clarified, "but to face this directly. Running away from family conflict is what I did 5 years ago. Am not that person anymore." Kira studied me for a moment. "Want company? I make an excellent wedding crasher." For the first time in days, I laughed genuinely. "Actually, I think I do." The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned with picture-perfect blue skies, the kind of weather brides dream about. I watched the sunrise from my hotel room in Ridgeview, mentally preparing for the day ahead. Kira was in the adjoining room, having flown with me late the previous night. "Are you sure about this?" she asked over breakfast. "We could still catch a flight back to San Francisco." "I'm sure," I replied, though my stomach twisted with anxiety. I'm done letting them control the narrative. Besides, Grandma Rose would never forgive me if I left her alone with them today. My phone had been conspicuously quiet from most family members, though my parents had texted to say they understood my decision to come and would support me however they could. Grandma Rose had been more direct. "Wear something stunning. If they're going to talk about you anyway, give them something worth talking about." Taking her advice, Id brought a designer dress in a bold emerald green, elegant, enough for a wedding but distinctive enough to make a statement. As Kira and I prepared, I tried to focus on my purpose, not to disrupt Jessica's day, but to stand my ground with dignity. We arrived at the church 45 minutes before the ceremony. Guests were already gathering outside, many of them doing double takes as they recognized me. I spotted my parents near the entrance and headed toward them. "Heather," my mother embraced me tightly, "you look beautiful." My father squeezed my shoulder supportively. "Proud of you, kiddo." We entered the church together, finding seats near the middle, visible but not provocatively so. The whispers and stares followed us like a wave, but I kept my head high and my expression neutral. Minutes later, Aunt Patricia stormed down the aisle toward us, her face flushed beneath her carefully applied makeup. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You were explicitly told you're not welcome." "I was invited months ago," I replied calmly. "I've come to support my cousin on her wedding day. I have no intention of causing a scene." "You've done nothing but cause scenes." Her voice rose enough that nearby guests turned to watch. "First, you humiliate Matthew professionally. Then you involve the media with your corporate drama, and now you crash the wedding." "Patricia," my father intervened quietly, "this isn't the place." "You're absolutely right," she snapped, "which is why she shouldn't be here. Security will escort her out. That won't be necessary," came Grandma Rose's firm voice as she approached, elegant in her pale blue dress. "Heather is family, and she's here at my invitation. Unless you'd like to have me removed as well." The standoff might have continued, but the arrival of more guests forced Aunt Patricia to retreat, though not before whispering, "This isn't over." In the bridal preparation room, word of my arrival apparently caused chaos. According to a sympathetic cousin who slipped me a text, Jessica had broken down in tears, claiming I was trying to steal her spotlight. Uncle Robert was reportedly making calls to have me removed from the premises. Despite the tension, the ceremony began on schedule. Jessica looked genuinely beautiful in her elaborate gown, and for a brief moment, as she walked down the aisle, I remembered the little girl who had once been my closest friend. Our eyes met briefly, hers widening in surprise before quickly looking away. The ceremony proceeded without disruption. I remained quiet and respectful throughout, though I noticed Matthew, at the altar, repeatedly glancing nervously in my direction. He looked significantly less confident than he had in my office, his smile strained as he recited his vows. It was during the reception that things truly unraveled. I had planned to make a brief appearance, congratulate the couple politely, and leave. But as Kira and I entered the venue, we were immediately intercepted by a distinguished older couple I recognized from photos as Matthew's parents. "So you're the famous Heather," his mother said, her tone icy. "I understand you've taken quite an interest in destroying our son's career." "Mrs. Jenkins," I began carefully, "I think you've been misinformed about—" "Save it," she interrupted. "Matthew has explained everything. Using your position to settle a personal grudge is unprofessional and petty. We've donated to the business school at your company's university for years. The dean will be hearing about this." I might have let this pass, but her husband added, "Women in these inflated tech positions often let emotion override judgment. It's why traditional firms hesitate to promote them." Kira made a small choking sound beside me. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't involve words inappropriate for a wedding, Grandma Rose appeared at my elbow. "Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins," she said pleasantly, "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Rose Adams, Heather's grandmother, and a retired judge who spent 30 years listening to people tell their version of events." Her smile remained warm while her eyes turned steely. "I've found that truth usually lies somewhere between the extremes, but sometimes one side is simply wrong. Your son lied on his resume, attempted to access confidential corporate information, and is now facing potential legal consequences for his actions. If you're concerned about his career, I suggest you discuss that with him rather than harassing my granddaughter at a family event." The stunning directness of her response left them momentarily speechless. I used the opportunity to guide Grandma Rose away, whispering, "You're amazing. I'm old," she corrected with a wink. "It's much more liberating." Our exchange had drawn attention. Guests were watching openly now, including Jessica, who suddenly appeared before us, still in her wedding gown but with mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "How dare you come here and make a scene?" she hissed. "This is my day." "Jessica, I haven't made any scene," I replied quietly. "I came to support you despite everything. I've been nothing but respectful." "Respectful." Her voice rose sharply. "You've been trying to one-up me our entire lives. You couldn't stand that I found someone successful while you were playing entrepreneur, so you had to ruin it." Her outburst silenced the nearby conversations. I was acutely aware of dozens of eyes on us, but kept my voice level. "Jessica, that's not true. I built my company through hard work, not to compete with you. And I didn't ruin anything. Matthew's own actions did that." "Liar," she shouted, tears streaming now. "You've always been jealous of me, always trying to prove you're better. Well, congratulations. Everyone thinks you're so impressive now." Uncle Robert appeared, attempting to guide Jessica away, but she shook him off. "Tell them, Dad. Tell them how Heather manipulated everything to make Matthew look bad, because she couldn't stand that he didn't think her little company was impressive." Uncle Robert looked uncomfortable. "Jessica, honey, let's discuss this privately." "No." She turned to the now silent crowd of guests. "She's trying to destroy our lives because of a stupid comment at a family dinner. Matthew was just being honest about her chances in the industry." From the corner of my eye, I saw Matthew approach cautiously, his expression a mix of embarrassment and calculation. "She's right," he said, attempting to sound reasonable. "This has all spiraled from a simple misunderstanding. I merely offered some candid professional advice, and Heather took it personally. When I applied to her company, not knowing she was involved, of course she used it as an opportunity for revenge. The deliberate distortion of events was breathtaking." I looked around at the confused faces of family and friends, many clearly uncertain who to believe. For a moment, I considered walking away, letting them have their narrative. But something had fundamentally changed in me. I was no longer the person who would retreat from conflict to keep the peace. "That's not what happened," I said clearly, addressing the room. "Matthew told me no real company would hire someone like me." When he later applied to my company, using information improperly obtained through family connections, he was rejected on his lack of qualifications and ethics, not personal grudges. Convenient version. Matthew scoffed, but I noticed sweat beading on his forehead. We have recorded evidence of you attempting to bribe employees for information, I continued calmly. Your resume falsifications have been documented, and your collaboration with a board member to undermine the company has been presented to our legal team. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Matthew's parents looked stricken. You're lying, Jessica insisted, but with less conviction. Matthew wouldn't do that. It was Kira who responded, her voice professional but firm. Miss Adams is being entirely accurate. Mr. Jenkins' actions are thoroughly documented, including his recorded phone calls to our employees offering payment for defamatory information. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Matthew's father stepped forward, his face ashen. Matthew, is this true? Matthew's confidence finally cracked. Dad, it's complicated. They're twisting things. Answer the question, his father demanded. Did you falsify your resume? Did you attempt to bribe employees? Matthew's silence was damning. Jessica stared at him, then at me, confusion and betrayal washing over her face. You, said Heather was just being vindictive. You said she was making things up because she was jealous. Jessica, baby, let me explain. Matthew began, reaching for her arm. She jerked away. Did you lie to me? The personal drama was unfolding in front of nearly 200 guests. I felt a stab of sympathy for Jessica despite everything. This public humiliation wasn't what I had wanted. I think we should give Jessica and Matthew some privacy, I suggested, stepping back. Surprisingly, it was Uncle Robert who approached me as the crowd began dispersing, and the mortified couple was led away by the wedding planner. I may have been hasty. In my judgment, he said stiffly, it appears there were factors I wasn't aware of. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Uncle Robert, it was significant. Family is complicated, I replied. We all make mistakes in protecting the people we love. He nodded, looking suddenly older and very tired. For what it's worth, your grandmother always said you'd prove us all wrong someday. I should have listened to her sooner. As guests awkwardly returned to their tables, trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed a wedding imploding, Kira touched my arm, ready to go. I nodded, emotionally drained but also strangely peaceful. The truth had finally emerged messily and painfully. But honestly, whatever happened next with my family would at least be based on reality, not illusion. As we left, Grandma Rose hugged me tightly. Remember what I said about success being the best revenge, but family still being family? I remember. You've achieved the first part beautifully, she said. Now comes the harder work of the second part, healing what can be healed. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't Jessica and Matthew had ultimately postponed the ceremony indefinitely, I stood at the windows of my office, watching the San Francisco fog roll in. The company had not only recovered from last year's crisis but emerged stronger. Our stock price had reached an all-time high, and we'd just closed our largest client contract to date. The aftermath of Thomas Blackwood's removal from the board had been surprisingly positive. His replacement, a brilliant cybersecurity expert named Serena Washington, brought fresh perspectives that strengthened our strategic direction. The board had also implemented more robust governance procedures, making us a case study in corporate resilience. Matthew was facing professional consequences beyond his failed interview with us. After his resume falsifications became known, Lancaster Financial had distanced themselves completely. The last I heard, he had moved to Chicago to pursue other opportunities, a familiar euphemism for starting over after burning bridges. More surprising was the slow reconciliation with parts of my family. It began with a handwritten letter from Jessica that arrived about 2 months after the wedding debacle. Unlike her previous communications, this one contained no accusations or demands, just raw honesty. I've been jealous of you since we were teenagers, she wrote. You always seemed to know exactly what you wanted and weren't afraid to go after it, while I was just following what everyone expected of me. I convinced myself you were the problem because it was easier than admitting I was unhappy with my own choices. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet, just acknowledging the truth. Id waited a week before responding, wanting to ensure my reply came from a place of genuine reflection rather than reflexive politeness. We'd begun a cautious exchange of emails since then, more honest than we'd been with each other in years. She had broken up with Matthew after discovering additional lies about his past and his intentions toward her family's connections. The process of rebuilding her life was difficult but seemed to be giving her a new sense of authentic identity. Uncle Robert had taken longer to reach out, but eventually sent a formal email acknowledging his error in judgment regarding recent family matters. It wasn't exactly warm, but from a proud man like him, it represented significant movement. Aunt Patricia remained distant, though she had stopped actively disparaging me at family gatherings, according to my mother. The most meaningful family development was Grandma Rose's decision to move to San Francisco. At 82, Shed announced she was tired of winters and family drama and wanted a change of scenery. It helped her find a beautiful apartment near the bay, and Shed become something of a beloved figure around our office, occasionally dropping by with homemade cookies and surprisingly insightful business observations. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Kira entered with a tablet in hand. "The scholarship committee has selected the first 10 recipients," she announced. "They're ready for your approval." The Ridgeview Entrepreneurship Initiative had been my response to the family crisis, a program funding young entrepreneurs from my hometown and similar communities, providing not just capital but mentorship and industry connections. It was my way of creating something positive from the conflict, turning personal pain into opportunity for others. I reviewed the candidates, bright, ambitious young people with innovative ideas but limited resources much like myself years ago. Approving their scholarships brought a sense of completion to the journey. Later that afternoon, I interviewed a nervous young woman fresh out of college. Her resume wasn't perfect, her experience was limited, but her passion and quick thinking reminded me powerfully of myself at that age. "I know I don't have the typical background for this position," she admitted, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I'm a fast learner and I'll work harder than anyone else to prove myself." I thought about Matthew's dismissive attitude, about all the doors that had closed in my face before I built my own door. I thought about the difference between giving someone an unearned advantage and giving them a fair chance. "Everyone starts somewhere," I told her. "What matters isn't where you come from, but what you do with the opportunities you're given." Her relief was palpable as I outlined the position I thought Shed be perfect for, not the one Shed applied for, but one that better matched her apparent strengths. As she left, visibly fighting back tears of gratitude, I felt the completion of a circle. 5 years ago, Id left my hometown, determined to prove everyone wrong. Id succeeded beyond my expectations, but in the process, Id learned that true success wasn't about validation from others. It was about creating value, maintaining integrity, and lifting others as you climb. The family wounds were slowly healing. Not perfectly, not completely, but healing nonetheless. The corporate challenges had been overcome, and I had emerged from it all with a clearer sense of who I was and what mattered. That evening, I joined Grandma Rose for dinner at her new apartment. As we enjoyed the sunset view over the bay, she raised her glass in a toast to proving them wrong without becoming what you fought against, she said with a knowing smile. The hardest victory of all. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a deep sense of peace. And to second chances for everyone. Have you ever had someone underestimate you who later had to eat their words? I'd love to hear your stories of sweet professional revenge in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and lessons learned the hard way. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that success is the best revenge. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the people who tell you you'll never get in are the ones who end up sitting across from you in an interview. Stay strong and keep building your empire.